from my understanding of where each of your technologies are going to be positioned in the context of the customer experience or the user acquisition funnel, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's the underlying kind of thesis about the user experience or about the flow from encountering free content to paying for content and the steps in between. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the thesis of each of your companies and why you're kind of pursuing it that way. Maybe we'll start with Cosmin.
So I think for us, the underlying thesis is trust. I believe in a trust-based system enforced by technology, where you basically want to put something in front of the audience and let the audience choose whether they want to pay by paying you money, or by paying you with ads, or by paying you with whatever they want to share with you. And I think if you do that, you basically reverse the process that has not been working on the internet for such a long time, which is you try to bring back the IOU to the internet and just say, you know, this works in real life. Here's something that I own and I have. It's good for you, so check it out and pay later. And it doesn't matter if you pay with data, if you pay with ads, if you pay with money. So I would say for us, it's trust. And this is something that I experienced pretty well with now with LaterPay in Germany. I said before, 75%, 76% of the users are going to register and pay later. And remember, we don't know anything about those users. They could simply walk away, but they don't. And once they get there, 30% of the users decide to go for the next higher package, more expensive one, which is the time pass. So basically, you start generating paying customers. In one of the former panels, someone said that you're talking about customers, you're not talking about users, and I fully agree with that. So to me, trust is the underlying principle that we need to put at work in order to reverse also that process that many, not the Wall Street Journal, because they always sold content, but many others have kind of failed to do out there, which is to convey the value of their content and ask for money. And if you ask the users for money and put some quality in front of them, in trust in your quality, trust in you providing a better user experience, you will see reward for that in whatever form, monetary or advertising, which is, again, money.
Same question, Dan.
Yeah, I think our focus is really on two things. The first being education, and the second being choice. So the education piece for consumers, in helping them throughout the experience to understand that it wouldn't be this candid, but this content isn't free. It's never been free. You have been paying with your time and attention, and you don't have a choice in the way that you consume that content or the advertising that's associated with that content. So instead of just jumping right to start paying for the content, maybe give that user a choice. A common thing that's out in different industries right now is paying to avoid ads. Really what you're doing is not only are you paying to avoid ads, you're paying for the content. So we want to make sure that we educate consumers and then give them that choice. So if they want to keep consuming ads, then great. Let's get them some ads where there's an explicit relationship between the consumer and the advertiser, saying that this piece of content is not free. It is being given to you because Hertz is paying your way, or whatever advertiser is in that scenario. And that changes the relationship between advertisers and consumers. This happens a lot at airports when you want the 20 minutes of free internet, and that ad populates. It says, you're getting your 20 minutes of free internet because this advertiser is paying for it. So my relationship with that advertiser in that moment is very different than when an interstitial pops up and I'm trying to read an article. So starting with that, changing the experience in general, but then giving them the option to, if they would like to, pay directly for that content. And maybe the incentive is to avoid ads. Maybe the incentive is to have a better just overall visual reading experience, whether it's mobile or desktop or whatever the future holds. So those are the two things that we're really focused on right now is education, first and foremost, helping users to understand that this has never been free and it will not become free. And now what can you do about it? Here's some choices for you to take a little bit of ownership in the way that you consume content.
So based on what you guys know about each other's products and positioning, would you consider yourselves competitors or collaborators, or and then also what about like what Tony's doing with Scroll? Is that a competitive thing, or is that an alternative that fits into the same ecosystem? Or like maybe you could, how do you guys see it all blending together?
To be determined. No, go ahead.
Well, I think, first of all, this market is huge. It's a totally unexploited market. And if you look at the numbers, I think Conductor also confirmed the 2%. It's something between 1 and 3, 1 and 5% that you can monetize at all right now with subscriptions. And that means that 97% are totally not monetized right now. So the market in itself is huge, and I think that it needs different approaches. I don't believe in a winner takes it all kind of thing. I think there are different revenue models for different audiences and target groups that will work over time. So what may work for Gizmodo may not work for others, so what may work for the New York Times will definitely not work for many others. That's why I think that whatever happens, we will always see a bunch of payment solutions out there trying to serve your market. Having said that, I think that we also don't really compete because we have a few underlying aspects that are the same. We just want the user to take a choice and either pay with money or pay with ads. And at the same time, we are all about onboarding users into paying customers. And basically the whole part with subscriptions we do because we had to offer it. But if I could, I would just like to go back to our USB and just stay with this running tab for digital content and try to occupy that space and be of help there and partner up with other companies. I think we won't see a catch-all solution simply because there's no one out there who figured it out.
Do you, like, you know, I'm remembering a conversation I had with the FT in 2015, and I was working with the Coalition of European News Media Companies through my role at The Guardian, and the FT was really, really good at understanding the conversion rate of a customer from first encounter to subscriber, and then loyalty subsequent to that, and where those major conversions were happening and how to optimize each one of those conversion steps. And so what I'm wondering now is, like, as payment systems become much more kind of an obvious strategic direction for the news publishers, are you seeing in your interaction with publishers an understanding of how to manage a customer through that customer acquisition funnel? Or is it still really murky? I mean, it was, when I had that conversation with the FT, it made a lot of sense to me, and this is going to be a shameless plug for my other company called channelcrossingspress.com. I sell nautical charts, framed placemats, or, you know, posters. But but that company lets me, like, play in Spotify, or not on Shopify, which is this amazing, like, e-commerce CMS where I can see exactly where people fall out of my customer acquisition funnel. And I felt like when I was having that conversation with the FT, we were speaking the same language from that experience, but the other publishers in the room just had no idea what we were talking about. But it seems as though it's imperative in order for payments to really take foot in the industry, publishers need to understand their relationship with their readers as customers. And are you experiencing that more and more now? It seems like that has to be growing.
It is. It's funny, I had a startup that I sold at the end of last year, and we were on Shopify as well. And that was just like so much fun to sit there and try to make it happen. But I mean, I think what's a little bit different for us is that we agree that subscriptions are good and better than ad revenue, but we're more focused on reader revenue, not subscription-only revenue. Because if you talk to people like in the gaming industry and you talk to them about subscriptions, they kind of laugh and they say, why would I cap the amount of money that I can make from a person over any course of time? If I did that and I charge $20 a month to play this game, that's fine, but they spend incrementally, significantly more than that throughout the life of the game in the game. So where's the opportunity there? Is there something even more lucrative than subscriptions? And so when we look at that, what is the funnel for that? And I think the biggest thing is removing the friction and the decision-making process during that consumption period. So, you know, in Cosmin's case, that could be, and I'm not speaking for you, you know, paying later. That removes the friction. I don't have to make the decision right now. I can make that decision later when it's more appropriate for me. For us, I think that we're really interested in testing around if it's an inconsequential amount of money to the user, but maybe significantly more money to the publisher than they're bringing in ad revenue, what are the levers that you can pull there to make that completely frictionless, so much so that the example I like to use is Uber. How do you pay for an Uber? You don't. You just get out of the car. Do you know what it cost? I don't know. Do you care? Maybe. You can go back and look at it later when you're doing your expense report. I don't know. But in the moment, it's completely frictionless. There's nothing there. There's no action you have to take. So when you consume that piece of content, is there a way to make that completely frictionless with an inconsequential transaction that when you look back on it, you just don't really care, and you can keep moving on with your day? So I think that is a little bit off topic, but relevant.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you talk about frictionlessness-ish, I suppose what my mind goes to is standards and protocols and the things that don't exist to the degree necessary to actually facilitate that kind of efficiency. And so, Bill, I was wondering if you could, you know, you're focused on trying to establish some standards, trying to establish some protocols that could be used in the context of transactions for content at scale. And I guess the question that I have for you is, like, what is the state of things in the industry right now in terms of the standards necessary for that sort of frictionless transaction experience, or what direction should we be going?
Well, I think there are standards, but they are isolated to companies or groups of companies. And it's not clear that it seems like there's a place for an entity to try and bring together a standards development process. And that's what we hope, that's what we hope will be of value in ITEGA. Because if you think about it, railroads had to figure out common gauge so you didn't have to unload your rail car to switch railroads. And people who generate electricity in this country had to agree on 60 cycle, 120 AC. And when you swipe a Visa or a MasterCard or an Amex card, it goes through the same swipe machine at the point of purchase, even though they're different companies, and for all practical purposes, in competing with each other, they're still sharing that infrastructure. So I think there is, it seems like within the ad tech world, there is an effort to try and come up with some standards that would reduce the amount of cookies that have to be on your machine. But it's not clear that the ownership structure of that is optimized from a public benefit point of view yet. So I think the answer is we need things that will make it possible for a constellation of different approaches to user revenue work, but where there are common platforms for them to operate on where it makes sense for those to exist.
Yeah, Raju, from a publisher's perspective, what are the missing pieces, or what are the fundamental elements to a solution that you think might work in the market?
There are no missing pieces. If I want to charge today, there's plenty of frictionless ways of doing it, credit cards and all sorts of payment systems, right? So the issue I don't think is necessarily that. The issue to me, a larger issue is the idea of digital brought amazing promiscuity of our audiences, right? That they can go anywhere. But we are still trying to say, pay me, pay the New York Times, pay the Wall Street Journal, distinctly than paying anybody else. And at some point, I think we've already reached that tipping point where people are adding these things up. They're saying $200 for the Journal, $300 for the New York Times. Meanwhile, if they actually sit down and audit all the amounts they're paying for Netflix and everything else, we're talking now in a middle-class household, we're talking several $100s a month going on payments, right? So I think that's the real hurdle. So you're trying to say Scroll and a few others are trying to solve that problem by saying, pay $5 and you'll get like a bunch of subscriptions in there. The question is like if you're, it's a chicken and egg situation sometimes where can you get everybody to be on one place and share it? I have a feeling that while we spend a lot of energy about payment systems and our individual brands and friction, the next wave of threats are going to come if the AT&Ts and Verizons can pull off their media acquisitions. I mean, take Verizon, for example, right? I mean, they, with Oath and with a bunch of their media brands, if I get a note from them saying, I'm a Verizon customer, phone and internet, hey, for $1 more in your phone bill, here are 10 amazing brands and our relationships with NFL and a bunch of things, I would instantly say yes, right? Because friction is like electricity, I don't think about it, right? So I think the biggest threat that's going to come and that could change this whole landscape and this whole conversation is if the phone companies get their media act together and the billing becomes invisible almost, right? So I think there are lots of things that are emerging that will kind of upend our thinking that I am the New York Times and I have to figure out how somebody gives me $300 or $600.
Yeah, Cosmin?
I'd like to challenge that for a second. You said that there are enough frictionless payment methods out there, and basically you'd see the problem somewhere else. Like if you in the room, when you hit a paywall, what's your reaction? Usually, almost no one really jumps that paywall in that second. Whenever you want to read something and there's another paywall going up, you know exactly it's going to take you 2 to 3 minutes to get through that, so you give up right there. And a second feeling is that you'll have to commit again to something, but what you want is you just want a glass of milk and you're being offered a whole cow. So you don't want that. So that's why I think the frictionlessness is one of the most important hurdles that we see. And of course we are biased because we are all about payments. But if you, like with us, 78% of all users purchase within less than 10 seconds. And now with AMP, it's 1 to 2 seconds. So you want to make it so easy that users start understanding the value that your content offers, but at the same time give you enough insights for you to work with that data and create either new products or new approaches to bundling, unbundling, rebundling.
Cosmin, the fallacy of the argument is that the friction is ongoing. The real friction for media companies is the first time you get somebody to give you the credit card. That is the biggest friction, right? Doesn't change at all with your model or any other model. At some point, you have to ask me for my credit card information, whether I read 10 stories before and then you ask me or 10 stories later. The hope is that the experience of reading 10 stories has been so wonderful that I'll take my card and put in all the information. The hurdle and the friction isn't going away. It's a fallacy to assume that reading it before, reading it after changes that. That's the hurdle that our industry has never been able to get over. Once you get over, as you know, you keep them for like many, many years. I mean, my New York Times subscription is probably 20 years old. If I ever look at how much I'm paying every year, I would be heartbroken, right? I am probably paying, I think, $700 or $800 a year for the New York Times. But it just happened over time. So that friction isn't going away anytime soon, whether you prepay, postpay, whatever. At some point, you're going to ask me for my credit card.
So the New York Times asked me for my credit card for at least 5 or 6 years, and it was only Trump who made me jump.
Right? Fair enough, right? So you are not necessarily that's what I meant by saying that there'll only be a certain number of people who will pay. I think the fundamental problem with our industry is we somehow thought paywalls were the salvation. It is just one of like 7, 8 ways to make money, and it'll help a little bit. It'll be a stable revenue, unlike advertising. But if anybody thought that a paywall is going to get them to revenue models that work nirvana, that's our mistake.
Yeah, but I think there's a bridge between like paywalls and nothing. That's why I think there's really a huge universe living between ads and subscriptions. If you talk about pay gates, which is just another different name for softer paywall or different products. But I think if you manage to get people's attention and get them over that hump of paying first time ever for content, getting used to that content, getting used to the benefit that you offer and seeing that it doesn't hurt, then you win customers and you can monetize on that forever. And my point before was that I read those articles all the time and I bumped into the 10 article limit and I didn't jump. And the quality of the content was the same.
I mean, it feels like what we're talking about here is dating before getting married. You know, I mean, it's like, you know, the friction will always be there for the time that you actually provide the credit card number. Okay. And what Cosmin's talking about is how to warm up to that moment when you're going to be asking for that credit card number. But then once it's there, then you've got the customer going forward.
Well, and further, if at the point you get there, the person doing the asking already has your credit card for some other reason, then you're home.
Well,
free.
that's the thing that the issue that you raise in terms of because like in Europe they have user data collectives now that are operated by the wireless carriers, like in Germany and in Switzerland, and it's incredibly efficient because those companies own the entire market for cell phone service. So they're the natural owner of all the user data, but then it presents a pretty awkward public policy issue that is now needing to probably be litigated. So one of the things that I'm wondering about is how is GDPR going to affect the payment question, or how, or if, you know, here in the U.S. maybe the more appropriate question would be like, what if Verizon did that? What if the carriers started and then they started to bundle in ways that were really had an unfortunate economic impact on the relative value of any individual brand, but they had the power to actually force that on the industry.
A couple of comments of that. One is that we crossed a really dangerous bridge when we allowed Comcast to buy NBC a number of years ago, because we are mixing pipes and content together, and that's going to come to a crisis, I think, at some point, where we will need to break that apart again, just the way in the 30s the Supreme Court broke the displaying of movies apart from the studios. Whether that happens, whether we're smart enough legally and legislatively to figure that out and make that happen, who knows. But the other thing is, I think my answer is that if AT&T's leveraging the account relationship they already have and adding content onto that, as you suggested, for an extra $1 a month, I say more power to them, as long as they're on a platform that allows me to unplug there and do the same deal with Verizon instead, or do the same deal with Disney when Disney gets their video thing going. One thing that'll be interesting to watch is how quickly does Disney, which is starting their over-the-top video service to compete with Netflix and Amazon, how quickly they realize that they need to get content from other parties besides just Disney to make that an attractive proposition.
You know, that's how many Netflix subscribers? How many AMC ad-free subscribers? You know, you can do that now. It's awesome. And it was like, wow, a new Netflix. Like when I encountered that on Comcast, it was like, wow, a new Netflix. All of the infrastructure is Comcast, but with the same business model as Netflix. And so I'm like, I guess I would be more concerned about the wireless carriers having that kind of control. And I would wonder if having that kind of control would make us want to talk about them more than Google and Facebook next year.
Yeah, I think so.
Except that with this administration and this FCC, nothing's going to stop them from doing what they're doing. AT&T is going to buy CNN. It's done, right? It's just a matter of when. So once that happens, to your point, if it's like I can't go into AT&T and say, I'll only take your phone and I won't pay for CNN. I can do that, right? But I can't insist that they bring in Disney into it. Right. That's the power as equation is shifted, right?
Will they exclude Fox News? Like it'll be impossible to get Fox News on a phone that has CNN on it. That would be awesome.
You know, our industry has gotten into trouble with this attitude, right? That somehow we think that Fox News audiences, I used to work for News Corp, nothing to do with Fox News, which is the other company, but this attitude that somehow ignoring them makes a bunch of this country go away.
No, and I'm totally
More
kidding.
Fox
I mean,
News people will say,
to
"Let
my
me not
wife's
have CNN."
chagrin, I have Fox News on probably more than CNN, just because I want to know what
But your
the hell
point
is
is
going
taken,
on.
which is the idea that will one entity that owns a competitor let the other one on? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and will they have the power to do that?
Yeah.
Or because I don't see,
I think they shouldn't if they also own the pipe.
and I don't see a regulatory
Yeah.
interest in wading into that
Yeah.
for a while, at least.
Yeah, I mean, the number of times you see a big carrier fighting with a, big network fighting with a cable carrier, full-page ad saying, your ESPN is going to disappear from your thing. Please write or please call in.
Right.
I think 9 out of 10 people would ignore that, and then there'll be blackouts.
And those
then-
are always tough negotiations, and the content side always loses, for the most part, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're veering into public policy issues.
Yeah.
rather than the top.
Well, but you know what's interesting to me is I guess as we start talking about payments, and we think about, well, what's the state of it today? What's the direction of it tomorrow? The threats to news publisher payment potential strategies may end up being from corners of the economy that we're not really focused on today. But maybe one more question, and then I want to open it up to you guys. What about AMP and IA? Like, what about off-platform distribution? Where does that play a role currently? Where do you see it playing a role going forward in terms of growing the potential audience for conversion to subscription or payments of any kind? Cosmin.
So again, I'm biased there, but I think that Google with AMP really shows that they care about monetizing the internet in various ways and also supporting publishers in their quest to monetize their part of the internet and the audience. I think that what Google basically did is instant articles for the open web, which from my perspective changes everything, because they are all about publishers monetizing on their own properties, like on their own platform, not on someone else's platform. And I think this is going to be a critical path for the future, that publishers keep not only their brand, but also their audience and try to monetize those on their own presence, on their own website, and use social media as a marketplace to advertise, but basically lead the user to their own website and monetize them right there. That's why I think that Google wins big time, simply because they created instant articles for the open web. That creates a totally different dynamics, I would expect, and we'll see what the future brings. At the same time, I also wondered why Facebook doesn't simply use Google's AMP.
Yeah, I've been wondering that for a couple of years now.
I mean, I like the fact that Facebook and Google, for whatever their reasons, are starting to talk about helping publishers with subscriptions. I don't think has anything to do with helping publishers with subscriptions. It's got to do with the current political pressure they're facing and possible threats of regulation. But I'm glad it's happening. The fear I have with, for example, Facebook and subscriptions is that the terms are theirs, right? Today they're saying you get to keep X, we get to keep Y, or whatever the terms. They could, with 2 billion people going to 3 billion people, 6 months later they could say, we've rethought these terms, now they're going to be this. And that's the issue that I think publishers have, and that's why a couple of publishers are still not jumping into the Facebook subscriptions model either at this point. Google for years, linked first click free with the subscription aspect of it, and now they've kind of decoupled that, and we'll see if they mean it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there may be an incentive for Facebook to not change the terms because the percentage of content that comes from the publishers that they're trying to do these deals with is really, really small across all of Facebook. But at the same time, the value of having that content on Facebook is really, really high for political reasons, more so than from just feed velocity reasons, which is basically how Facebook makes most of its money. And so I wouldn't be surprised if the incentives didn't change, but it'll be interesting to see how it goes. Actually, one more question, then I promise I'll open up to you guys. What about voice and payments within like quality content through Alexa, through Google Home? Is anybody experimenting with that yet?
I think if they aren't, they should be, because it's only a matter of time before the proliferation there is extensive. And I think it's the Wild West to a certain degree, but in a good way. I mean, I think it will be very fun and exciting to see how organizations use that platform to create not only new revenue streams, but better user experiences. So, you know, for me, I think a lot of times, you know, people are a little bit afraid of change. It's just natural. But I think this change, you know, when you talk about it, people are very excited about it because the use case is very easy to understand, and it's like, okay, what can we do with this? This is exciting. So, yeah.
I mean, the rush into podcasts is early. You see people going in, and actually you're starting to make decent money on podcasts. The issue with voice is going to be interesting in terms of discoverability, right? Meaning that even now, if you try to find a very specific piece of content on Alexa, unless you use certain words in a certain way, it's very hard to find it. It's going to suggest you 10 other things. Yeah. And after a while, you're like, just kind of, you give up on that. But I think voice as a way of kind of communicating and getting things back is only going to be like bigger and bigger because it ties into, you know, driverless cars. It ties into a whole bunch of things where your hands are free, your eyes are free, and you're just commanding things to bring things back to you.
Is there a chance that it'll be taken over by an advertising model and instead of a payments model, or would one be mutually exclusive of the other or not? Or I'm wondering, like, as voice evolves, you know, which monetization strategy is most likely to actually become the dominant one for that user experience?
You know, in some ways they're the same. I mean, because whether you are paying somebody or paying an advertiser for somebody's attention, or whether the subscriber or customer is paying to read something, you have to have a roughly similar infrastructure for moving records of the sort of notation of that behavior around. And so, I mean, in a sense, Google has had a micropayment system running on the ad side for 15 years. And it's just that it's proprietary. And we don't know what's going on inside it if we're not inside Google.
So I think when you speak about voice, it's not only voice, but also this other newer technologies that are coming along with it, like AR, augmented reality, virtual reality, a little bit further down the road. But basically, all these new technologies, in my opinion, have one common denominator, which is it's more and more hands-free. So it will become more and more crucial to find ways to be able to convey that value to the customer, but on the other end, to give the customer a possibility to pay for that in whatever way. Because voice in also AR, you're not going to use your keyboard or your hands. You're in a hands-free environment. So the internet creates so many touch points right now, and more of these touch points are actually touchless. But there is no technological answer to that on the payments part of it. So I think we're going to see a lot of development there. And basically, whoever figures that out is also going to bridge the gap between the physical world, where you see a newspaper, and the digital world, where you can actually read that. So I see bridges between those worlds, and I think they open up new, better opportunities than before they existed.
Questions? Nobody asked about blockchain. What about blockchain? How's that going to change things?
Well, I don't know if it's necessary for what we're talking about executing on. I think something we discussed last night is that the amount of transactions that would need to happen simultaneously in the current way that blockchains operate isn't going to be feasible. So I think from a fundamental perspective, in terms of using that type of technology, yeah, it makes sense. But I think in its current state, it's not going to work. And I don't even know if it's necessary for what it is that we're talking about.
I think that the biggest challenge with blockchain is that most people don't understand the difference between like blockchain and cryptocurrencies. So I think there's a lot of educational work to be done. Like when you explain to someone what it is, or you need to find metaphors and then explain that while blockchain is the highway and the net that brings you from A to B, cryptocurrency is the car. that actually right now it's the Bitcoin, like the BMW, but you'll have the Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz and others. So basically understanding what the difference between the two of them is going to be very important, and that will open up the possibility for people to come up with new ideas. I think that there's a huge amount of business models that we are going to see based on blockchain, but you need all these creative minds to understand that whole potential of blockchain and how you could put it to use. So I think we're a couple of years away from really scalable revenue and business models. We do see right now a couple of models in, like from the Nordics, Hubi. And we see some models that combine blockchain and payments for journalism. But again, you'll need to explain to the people what the difference is between cryptocurrencies and blockchain, and then to innovate based on those. So I think you're going to see a lot of models that have blockchain at their basis, but no one knows about it.
Okay. Kind of an underlying technology.
Yeah.
The only prediction I'll make is we're going to fail at it, because this is an industry, publishers as a group. The last time we actually succeeded with anything to do with currency was when we had tabloids selling for 10 cents and 15 cents, coins. We failed at currency notes, we failed at online billing, we failed at credit cards, we failed at Kickstarter, we failed at Patreon, we're going to fail at Bitcoin. Somebody else is going to figure this out, and then guys like this will come and tell us how to do it.
Yeah.
To me, blockchain really represents a concept more than a technology. It's a concept of having either completely eliminating or reducing as much as possible a single point of failure or a big brother that's in control of something. And I think that we are going to move in that direction, and I think we'll move in that direction around distributed identity and around distributed user management. But I'm not sure that there'll ever be a system for micropayments or small payments or aggregation of payments or the ability to have one account that works at lots of different websites that doesn't have some centralized function, because I don't know how you manage trust ultimately without that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the blockchain cryptocurrency community, they're learning the challenges of maintaining trust over any given currency right now. But I think it took a couple of years of extraordinary, trading of those currencies before the circumstances began to take over that reflect the challenges inherent in trust.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
So, it's more of an observation and kind of a question, but I feel like a lot of what we're talking about here is speculative, and maybe it's just because the way the conversation's going, it's not, but especially in terms of like the payment platforms, like these things might work, but they might not. So what do we actually know now, like based on data and performance you have in different markets, like what do we know about payment behavior and whether these things work or not, and what the psychology is in that, versus what you just think might be a model you haven't tested?
So,
Same sort of for Raju, like you've been in that world a long time, like what are you really confident about when it comes to like what people will pay for and use and how this stuff works, versus what you're kind of speculating about with Gizmodo or whatnot?
You mean you want us to get out of the clouds?
Yeah, I kind of want to sort out what's cloud.
Come on, man.
I like both, but it's a little like.
Okay, let's talk about real stuff that they can make money on today.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
What would you bet your house on, and what are you sort of hoping?
I think a couple of things for sure. One is that a single digit, if you're lucky, a high single digit percentage of your actual current consumers are going to pay for just content. I think that's been proven now pretty clearly. If you get up to 8-9%, it's a huge deal. Most people are at like 2, 3, 5%. And I think there seems to be that kind of a cap there. I think there is a willingness to kind of pay for things that are just not content, but there is like a clear value exchange, which is why you're seeing a lot of surrounding the actual content cost by other things to create a membership model. That seems to be working. And again, not big numbers. There seems to be a willingness to pay for brand extensions, events, and those kind of things as well. So I go back to my original point about, like, I think the way I think about media companies now is that if we can have 4, 5, or 7 different streams of revenue, advertising, video, display, memberships, subscriptions, events, individually, each one of those streams will be always challenged and in a flux, but collectively, you can still have a sustainable, growing business. That's part of the reason why I just, even though my instinct is to want to create some subscription, I just have not done it yet at Gizmodo, simply because I just don't see how I can replicate it just because I used to do it at the journal.
I think for us at Invisibly, the thing that I would bet my house on is that we don't have a clue what consumers are going to do and what they're willing to pay for and at how much and how that works. But what I do know is that if we can take a current model, the advertising model, and make it better and use that as a jumping off point to help people to convert, if that better ad network produces, then it doesn't matter what percentage converts, because we have a viable, sustainable business that's helping publishers to monetize their content. So in creating that first, we are then given the runway to figure out that math and figure out that conversion, and to work hard over the course of time to understand at which point consumers will tip, whether it's per piece of content or subscription or otherwise. And so that's how we're approaching this, to make sure that we aren't putting all our eggs in one basket and trying to go from A to C of right to micropayments or right to subscriptions. We want to go from A to B to C.
So there are 2 categories of knowledge that we have already. Knowledge that we can talk about and knowledge that we are not allowed to talk about. There's a lot of juicy stuff in there, but so from the first category, which we just published today, because I knew that I was here, we just got also the green light from the Spiegel people. We just published today a 1-year at Spiegel infographics with a bunch of probably useful stuff. I'm happy to put that on a hashtag. You can have a look at it. But you learn a lot. You learn something that really frightens you sometimes as a journalist, because you put so much time in, let's say, in a research piece on a specific topic, let's say politics, and you expect that to sell a lot. And then someone writes an article about divorce, and that gets factor 5 in revenues from your big piece where you just researched a long time. And then all of a sudden you understand that this happens over and over and over again, and you see that the user is willing to pay money for something entirely different than for what you have expected him to pay money for. So there are a lot of things that we already see, how users are willing to pay for what and when, and how much. Like Spiegel is pricing an article at 39 cents for one single article. We've had maybe a handful of people who complained about the price out of a couple of million articles that they sold. So you learn a lot. You learn about the pricing, you learn a lot, and I'm happy also afterwards, and I'm here until tomorrow noon to answer some of your questions. As said, some of the really juicy stuff cannot be published, but we're working on anonymizing as much as we can and sharing that data. But you learn a lot that you would have never, ever expected.
Yeah, I guess the practical recommendation would be to be in a position where you can experiment with stuff and then measure absolutely everything, and then ask other people what they think you should be measuring, because you probably didn't think of the other things that you should be measuring also. And I think that there's a lot of case studies out in the industry at this point. There's been a lot of attempts at paywalls, but I think that there's more interest in it now for obvious reasons, and so I would expect. I don't know. I tend to be optimistic, and so I think that the opportunity for us to figure out how to assess a value and actually convert that value into currency for quality content, I think that opportunity is ripe, and it's just a matter of now experimenting. So, any last questions? Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of discussion has been about how do we figure out frictionless ways to get
So I would just like to repeat what you just said 3 minutes ago. I think through experiments, you're going to learn all that. But in order to experiment, you'll have to have infrastructure in place that enables more than just subscriptions. As said before, no one really figured out which model works, and probably there will be no catch-all model, but without the real tools which allow you to experiment with selling individual pieces, bundled content, time-based bundles, all kinds of things, you're not going to find that out. Like only in the second when users agree to pay for something, you see, you learn from that. You'll probably find out, which is something that we just discovered with one of our customers recently, that by experimenting and by reading the data and trying to analyze every little piece of it, they found out that while their culture content gets published at 5 and 6 p.m. each day, the peak in buying that content is between 2 and 4. So basically, they are missing out on almost one day because the content gets published after the peak. People go home, and then they buy the stuff from yesterday 1 day later. So from that, they understood that they could optimize their flow. They probably have to talk to their people and say, could you please, publish that stuff a little bit earlier, publish content earlier, go home later, and that basically changes immediately the outcome. So the point is you need the right tools to experiment and find out for your target audience what works and how.
This is a general response. I think that people will pay for unique experiences that are relevant to their immediate needs and passions. And so I think that news is going to have to fit in that bucket somehow. And I think personalization is a promising approach, but that surely is not the only approach. I mean, I think some of the highest quality publishers are not doing anything personalized, but they're just doing an amazing job with what they do. And so people feel moved to support it.
Yeah, I think the challenge is really being in a technical position to find the answers to a lot of questions. I think it's really easy to just publish a lot of stuff. It's really hard to publish it in a way that allows you to slice it and dice it in the analytics. And then not only to slice it and dice it in the analytics, but also to have the questions that you want to ask the data to know what the answers might be. And so I think that it's a real, I mean, at some point, somebody mentioned, or was it today or earlier, that like the data science team is incredible. Like my favorite person in London is Tom Betts, the data scientist guy at the FT. I love that guy because I learned so much every single time I talk to him. And because he's just, not only is he slicing and dicing data, but he's figuring out what the questions are that then inform how they're going to slice and dice the data. And I think that that's beautiful, and I think that they're doing an amazing job of understanding the customer journey, not just to subscription, but then also to loyalty, and then depth of loyalty. I mean, it's incredible what they've done. And so, but it starts with asking the right questions and then having the technology to actually find the answers.